So, let me summarize the latest discussion by one word. I discussed what can be called a mosaic approach, which means the major topic was, after all, the Torah, how the performance of the commandments in the Torah affect the parallel structures in the divinity. But the Pentateuch was mentioned very clearly. That was the paradigm, which means a certain form of rabbinic behavior. The commandments were conceived to be of paramount importance, especially for the divine well-being. That I summarize what I said. What we're going to discuss now is that's a totally different approach, found also in Kabbalah, from time to time together with the mosaic approach, which I would like to call it Enochic, from the name Enoch, which means a totally different approach, which is found also in early Jewish sources, but very different from what I described earlier. There's other mythologies. I described three mythologies of what can be called biblical, rabbinical, and medieval types of literature. Now I would like to deal with another type of mythology, which is only scantily found in the Bible, but is found much more in a layer of Jewish literature known as pseudepigrapha or apocrypha or apocalyptic literature. It doesn't matter what name you will choose, which, excuse me? No. That's a question. Meaning a literature which was originally written in Hebrew or Aramaic, but survived basically Greek, Coptic, and other languages, and only a small part of it was discovered in the Qumran caves. That is a totally different literature, which deals much more with magical, angelological, demonical topics, side by side with discussions of the Hebrew Bible. So, to make it very short and very simplistic, I would call the pseudepigraphical literature attributed to Enoch, basically, but not only to, as Enochi, because that's interested in what? In a pre-mosaic layer. As you may know, Enoch in the Bible is found in Genesis chapter 5, long before the revelation of Moses. So this literature is capitalizing on topics found in Genesis 5-6, chapters 5-6, which had a totally different structure, phenomenological structure. I mean, commandments are not so important. What is much more important is ascension on high. Earlier we've seen, you must do here something, which affects something at the remote, but we're doing it here. And the locus of the human activity is here in the society. While the Enochic literature is dealing basically with the individual, Enoch, as a paradigm. And the basic vector is ascending on high. So that's a totally different logic. And we shall see some details. However, this literature was ignored by rabbinic Judaism, despite the fact it was written in Hebrew and Aramaic, found among Jews, written by and large by Jews, It was marginalized, or even more, by rabbinic literature. But this type of approach re-emerged in the Middle Ages. I would like not want to know the whole story, how it re-emerged. That's a difficult story. Maybe Carlos knows a little bit more about it.
I would like to know about it, how this...
You would like to
yes,
tell me? Okay.
After
so he wrote 550 pages about it. So, I believe that between the two lectures, I read more about what you wrote than you read about what I asked you to read. Also yours and his material. So it re-emerged powerfully in basically the 13th century in Kabbalah. The problem is how issues which were marginalized by rabbinic Judaism nevertheless were transmitted to Jews or rabbinical Jews in the Middle Ages. That's a topic about many people wrote about it. That's an enigma, but not a total enigma. To give you an example, our assumption is that what happened there in the caves will remain in the caves. And until 47, no one knew what written there. That's a false historical assumption. To give you one example, a very important document found in the cave was also known and copied in the Gniza in Cairo, meaning a huge deposit, if you like, of documents found in Cairo in a rabbinic community. So what is called the Damascus document survived in actually two copies, copied by rabbinic copists in a rabbinic society in till 11th century. That's what people believed, but actually now the assumption is they were copied in the 13th century, which means, that's an example, a whole treatise, not a small tradition, found among rabbinic Jews in the 13th, 14th century, the same period we're discussing here. Just one example. I can bring you also other examples. So there's actually not a problem to understand how it moved. People don't want to look in certain directions. So this example, that's a document, it's not a page. However, studies of magic in the Gniza show that this magic depends on Qumran. Studies of Professor Gideon Boat from Tel Aviv University. Another example. I can give you more examples that I can speak about it hours, if you like. My assumption is, nevertheless, we don't need those examples. Those examples, which are factual examples, they are not the real story. The real story is, as you asked some week ago, actually oral transmission, folklore discussion. Meaning, to look only to documents and to say what is found in the document is found only in the document is stupid. Because there was another culture of Jews dealing with mythologies. This culture remained active all the time. In a certain moment it survived and transpired also in higher forms of literature. I shall give you an example by reading here. But the principle that we're dealing only with documents, and those documents either have this angelological, demonological, magical aspects, or they don't have it in rabbinic literature, is a part of a story. You cannot say that a culture is only the documents. even today, we have all the documents in the world, still there is oral culture. That's what happened, in my opinion, in history. Scholars dealing with this issue ignore popular culture, saying that it disappeared, the rabbis killed this literature, as if the rabbis can decide something about folklore culture. Who cares about the rabbi saying, if your grandmother told you a nice story? So that is another explanation. However, there are also other explanations which are not oral, but documents which survived. And again, I don't want to enter here all the details. I mean, we can show there was something like that. Also in written documents. For example, in the 9th century, there is a sect of Judaism named the Karaites, who were very critical about rabbinic Judaism. So they are telling stories about what happens among the rabbis, which are always negative. And there you can find discussions about angels and magic and attributed to the rabbis. They were speaking about what? The 9th century. Meaning all this stuff was criticized as rabbinic by very learned people who knew what they are speaking about. And they are mentioning names of books found among the rabbis, with names found in the pseudepigraphical literature. For example, to give you an example, I don't remember if you mentioned it, a Karaite is saying, look, the rabbis had a stupid book named the Book of Asa and Azael. A book criticized as rabbinic by Karaites in the 9th, 10th century. So there was more than oral tradition, there was also written tradition. And why the people don't enter on this issue, that's too long a story to deal with it here. Here I would like to deal with something that happened in Kabbalah, in Castile, dealing with those issues. And that's a great problem, that the most important book produced in Castile, the Book of the Zohar, is using many times a book mentioned the secrets of Enoch. And Carlos wrote about the Slavonic Book of Enoch. Now, the Kabbalists, we're going to read it in a moment, the Kabbalists didn't say that the Slavonic Book of Second Enoch. For sure not. But the title, and from time to time the content is mentioned. So what happened? There was a parallel to the Slavonic Book of Enoch in the hands of rabbis in Toledo, or that's a pure invention, as scholars believed all the time, that's pure invention. They never had such a book, they invented it. Slowly it becomes more complex for reasons I cannot enter here. And indeed, you analyze some discussions in Enoch, the second Slavonic Book of Enoch, and the Book of the Zohar. And that started already with Andrei Orlov, and that's a long story which I cannot enter here, but what's important, people believe the second Book of Enoch is late, 10th century. Basically Christian, people would say, preserved by the Orthodox Church. 3-4 years ago, it was discovered that this book is 1st century, which means before Christianity. For example, so the whole story is very complex and has to do with the history of Kabbalah in Castile. did they have access of pseudepigraphical book and the return of the angels and the demons and all this stuff is this surfacing of traditions found in books and maybe also oral, or that's a pure invention of people sitting here and claiming that they have books. As scholarship in Kabbalah claimed all the time. They had nothing, that was, the term used was a library of the paradise, as if there was nothing like such a library, that was their invention. Slowly we come to a situation where it's not so simple to say. That's not something extraordinary. Because around 1260, a very important rabbi, not in Castile, but in Catalonia, Nachmanides, is telling us a story that he received the book, unknown in Judaism for 1,000 years, named The Wisdom of Solomon, in what he calls Syriac Aramaic. And he's quoting, it's quite obvious. His quotations are precise. So out of the book we have a parallel, that the whole book, stemming from ancient Jewish material, transpires in Barcelona or in Gerona. And it's quoted, and we have the quotations, it's impossible to deny something like that. No one ever, no Jews ever quoted this book for more than a millennium. And here we have an example that hard to deny, that no scholar denies that such a book survived in some form of Aramaic. And Kabbalists are using it. Also in Castile later on, but again I cannot enter. So what is the interesting part from the phenomenological aspect of this surfacing? Out of the blue, rabbinic Judaism, which was reticent toward angels, the word angels for sure, but the angelic aspect were marginal. We have angelology. For sure there are some sources in the between, Eichhalot literature, magical literature, where angelology is found. But in the 13th century Kabbalah, we have angelologies which are closer to what was found in the caves, rather than what is found in the between. Meaning the emergence of new dimensions of medieval Judaism, like angelology, demonology, magic, is not only a continuation of topics already found in Eichhalot literature or magical literature, Sefer HaRazim, but there is more. And again, I cannot enter into many details, but out of the blue, Castilian Kabbalah introduces many discussions on angels and demons, which are not found in Provençal Kabbalah and not found in Catalan Kabbalah. So here we can see that something happened, and we can see where it happened and when it happened. So that is part of a larger phenomenon that, again, I can only use general terms, I don't have the time to explain. In my opinion, all the time, from 10th century, in Europe, a huge transition of material from the East took place. Not only Kabbalah or angelology. The entire European Jewish culture, which was nihil in 900, there was a huge transfer of material that we didn't document it. Part of this transfer of knowledge from the East, Ottoman East, Palestine, Babylonian, maybe some part of Northern Africa, that created the Jewish culture in Europe. And part of it is transmission of material which may be connected to the pseudepigraphical material. So that's not impossible, because in Cairo there was, as I mentioned earlier, in the Griza, there were texts of the Qumran sect, Karaites. What is the Karaite? The Karaite sect, so scholars claim today, they are descendant of the sect of the cave. That's predominant tendency in scholarship today. Meaning, this culture didn't disappear. It disappeared basically in the imagination of scholars, for, again, reasons I don't want to enter now. If we look in such a way, the Jewish culture was not only some documents that we have or don't have. If you don't have, they didn't exist. That's the material found in manuscripts up to today. Is much bigger than we know. When you read manuscripts, you can find a lot of material which is not taken in consideration. Meaning, I don't speak about theories. I'm speaking about the fact that by reading manuscripts, you can find links that are not taken into account by scholars dealing with pseudepigraphical literature, because they cannot read Hebrew, and they don't read medieval material. And they claim that it's unknown, those material unknown in the Middle Ages. I can bring examples, but that's less important. Meaning, if you read Ashkenazi literature, 12th, 13th century, you're going to find a lot of mythology that we're going to deal with it today. It's something normal. Nothing special, nothing heretical about it. And this literature is quite, in modern terms, orthodox. Not marginal people are they are simply mentioning this myths of fallen angels, etc., something known. So what happens in Kabbalah is, as you remember, what I told you in the first lecture, Castile and Kabbalah capitalized also on the arrival of Ashkenazi masters to Castile. Those masters can be shown that they knew those mythologies from texts dated from 12th, 13th century, dated. So they brought this material to Castile. Why the Provençal Kabbalah and the Catalan Kabbalah didn't know? Because it was a Sephardi form of lore. While in the second part of the 13th century, the Ashkenazi material arrives with the people. It can be shown that they knew it before. So that's my explanation, that the Ashkenazi culture served as a conduit in this big transition of Jewish culture, which is not discussed in scholarship at all. We are saying how Kabbalah was transmitted. As if we don't know only one issue, we don't know how Kabbalah was transmitted. But if someone is going to ask you how the Talmud was transmitted, no one is going to give you an answer, no one knows. How the Midrashim were transmitted, how the prayers were transmitted. There's no answer. So my assumption is there was such a big transition which created European Jewish culture. In some places, those mythologies about angels were more powerful, in other places less powerful. So at the moment this material arrived to other centers of Jewish culture, and then it became more prominent. Okay. Very difficult issues that I said here. That's something which must be explored much more. Now, in the pseudepigraphical culture, there are a lot of angels. And those angels scarcely were mentioned in rabbinic literature, midrash or piyutim, what is called liturgical poems, or in Talmud. Now, those angels re-emerged in the book of the Zohar. You can find many discussions, not 2 or 3, but at least 10 discussions, lengthy discussions. One of them I brought here, in which you can see those people had another vision of Kabbalah, rather than what I explained to you last time, the Mosaic Kabbalah, dealt with commandments and influence on the heart. That is one major, the most important aspect of Kabbalah. That's why I discussed it earlier. Now I speak about something which emerged later. It was not terribly influential in Kabbalah, but had a huge impact on European culture, which I cannot enter here. This issue is dealing with another layer in reality. The Mosaic Kabbalah is dealing with the 10 Sefirot, the divine essence, and our impact on the divine essence. Some form of short circuit. No angels, no demons in the middle, us performing commandments versus the divine anthropos. That is the Mosaic style. However, out of the blue, you have another layer, the angelic layer, which is lower than the divine layer. And that's another type of, how to put it, reality, which can be combined, may not be combined, with the theosophical layer. Is this issue clear? It's very difficult issues. I must tell you that not too much to read about it, because that's new. Now, what is important in this approach is the possibility of a person to become an angel, to ascend on high, to be transformed, to become an angel. That's angelization, or angelification, however you like to put it. That is found a lot in Second Temple Jewish literature, meaning plus minus the period of Jesus Christ. This angelification had a huge impact on early Christianity. For example, Jesus Christ was conceived to be an angel, and only later on this vision was conceived to be heretical. But earlier discussions deal with the ascent of Jesus Christ, and he's becoming an angel. In a certain moment, this angelification was considered to be heresy, because he was conceived to be a god. But if you look to very early Christianity, you see that the story is a little bit more complex. This angelification remained part of Jewish culture in the pseudepigraphical period and had a huge impact in some forms of Kabbalah. Now we're going to read the text dealing with this issue, in which we're going to see what is the mechanism of this angelification, which has nothing to do with performing commandments, with having an impact of divinity, but just the transformation of a certain person. Without mentioning Moses and the Torah, by and large. So that's another aspect which flourished in the second part of the 13th century in Castile, more than an Ashkenazi. And the book of the Zohar is capitalizing on it a lot. So, in this process, we have a name. The name is Enoch. And when Enoch was translated on high, he's called by the name Metatron. Don't ask me what the meaning of Metatron, because that's many theories. But the idea is that a human, a mortal being, can be translated on high. That is scarcely found in the Bible. In the Bible, you have one word. What is written about Enoch? He was a good guy and disappeared. In Hebrew is one word, Einenu. What the meaning of Einenu? We don't know. In the pseudepigraphical literature is written, for sure, he ascended on high. He's not here because he's there. But the Bible was reticent. It has one more discussion on Elijah, that he was also carried on high. But that's not the ethos of the Mosaic religion. But it became very powerful in the pseudepigraphical literature and in Kabbalah. So I cannot enter in all the manifestations of it. But I brought one major example and some few others to show you that in addition to what I conceive, I explained to you, to be the major core of Kabbalah, the theosophical theological activity, we have also other alternatives, and that's why I called this class a variety of Kabbalah, not Kabbalah. So that is another major version, but not as important as the other versions, because we don't have a genre as we have in the case of the commandments. We have a genre with the books. You can put the books here to see how big it is. In the case of the Enochic Kabbalah, we don't have a genre. We have discussions which are spread over in different texts, including in the Zohar. But still, we can assume there was some form of cult of Enoch among Jews, among rabbinic Jews. I don't speak about what happened in Qumran. Okay. So, now to understand the text I'm going to read with you, must be aware that Enoch emerges chapter 5 of Genesis after Adam was expelled from the paradise. Expelled from the paradise, all of us know. I don't say fall, but he was expelled. In my opinion, there was a very important mythology attempting to say, yes, Adam sinned, he was expelled, but we can re-enter paradise as individuals by behaving in a certain way. We can take the place of Adam by ascending on high. This story is found in the Middle Ages in one way or another, in more than one text, in more than 10 texts. But in the book of the Zohar, it is dealt with in a very interesting way. We're going to read a little bit on it, and we'll see how Enoch, and then later on, is conceived to be some form of ideal, despite the fact that in rabbinic literature he is marginalized. So, the light that had been lost by the primeval man, meaning, according to the Midrash, Adam was luminous, radiant. In the moment he was expelled, he lost his light. So, the light has been lost by primeval man, because this light has been hidden in the paradise. I mean, in the moment he left the paradise, he left there also the light. He became corporeal, material. He, now we're speaking about Enoch, ascended on high, but did not sit on his place, because he was not perfect from all the sides, meaning it's not a recuperation, a total recuperation of Adam, or the place of Adam. We're going to see that he's in paradise, also becoming luminous, but not as the perfect creation of God, as it was the case of Adam. As the perfection below was deficient, it was very difficult for someone who was born here to reiterate the situation of Adam. But nevertheless, he ascended on high, according to what we read here. Because it was lost because of Adam's sin. So here we can see that, in fact, the comparison between the two. Adam lost, Enoch gained it in part, which means he returned to a certain extent to the place of Adam, to a certain extent. We'll see that quite well in a moment, more than we've seen until now. But that shows that what perfection is possible before perfection of Enoch. Before the Torah was given, we're speaking about hundreds of years before. He didn't pray, he didn't perform the commandments, and nevertheless, he actually was able to return to the place of Adam. So that is the Enochic aspect. Actually, he was not acquainted with the Torah. And he achieved more than someone, according to the Mosaic religion, can attain. What someone, according to the Mosaic religion, can perfect God. He can perfect himself, but he's going to remain here. Okay. Because of Adam's sins, who descended below and has been hidden within the trees of the garden, meaning the light. He stripped himself of all the aspects of the garden until the birth of Enoch ben Yared. Meaning, see, that was something which is a certain form of perfection. It didn't disappear with Adam. Was some form of deposit somewhere. Up to a certain moment. Meaning this type of perfection, of luminosity, is a dimension which continued to exist, but was not used by anyone before Enoch. So here we can see the spatial individual able to achieve a spatial status, which is a return, and that's a matter of personal perfection, and not related to Mosaic Judaism, which didn't exist according to the biblical story. Okay. When he was born, he was close to the garden. You see, already he's a privileged guy. He's not in the garden for the time being, but he's had some form of easy access to. He was close to the garden, and this light was dwelling in order to illumine him, meaning there was some radiation coming from the garden to him. He was anointed with the holy oil. I would like not to enter here. That is part that is found in Enoch, the Slavonic Enoch. That is actually anointment is a part of becoming spatial, dedicated to a very important task like the high priest, for example, or the Messiah. And the light that sparks was dwelling onto him. So slowly what happens, he is returning to the status of Adam. he entered paradise. So you see in a moment, this idea of entering paradise, which is returning to the place of Adam, is not only luminosity, but also to be there. And found the tree of life, the branches and the fruits of the tree. He said, I don't want to tell you the whole story from Genesis. He is now in the position of first Adam. He smelled them, and the spirit of the light dwelt upon him. Now, so he is now back there. Now, I'm interested now. Now we see a discussion which cannot be explained without the pseudepigraphical literature. The messengers, which are the supernal angels, out of the blue, we have messengers coming to him, came and taught him the supernal wisdom, gave him a book that was hidden within the tree of life. So, meaning, he's receiving almost everything. Wisdom, luminosity, place in the garden. And he studied from it and knew the ways of the Holy One, blessed be He. The ways of God, not the commandments. It's very important to see. Doesn't say that he performed the commandments. You know, the ways of God, which may be a totally cosmological story, and pursued them. As it written, and Enoch walked with God until the light has been perfected within him. What's meaning a accumulation of light? Everything was illuminated from outside, then he entered, and then slowly that's an accumulation. He's becoming luminous. And in this moment, when this light was perfected below, he wanted to ascend to his place and show that perfection. So you see here an individual able to ascend on high, to become perfect, to return to a pre-Mosaic type of perfection. According to the secret of Enoch. Now the term secret of Enoch is reminiscent of the name of the Slavonic Enoch, called in some manuscripts this book of the secrets of Enoch. So that you wrote about it at page 289. So that is, we can see what the secret of Enoch. Enoch in the Bible is not important. He died and disappeared. Out of the blue, we see here the perfect man ascending on high, becoming paradigmatic for all the righteous people who follow his paradigm. And here we have a secret. So don't forget, he received the book. True, he received the book. What book is it? We don't know if he wrote the book or not, but it's the book that he had. It's the book of Enoch. You see, here meaning they didn't say, he wrote the book, that's the book of Enoch. Yes, but he had the book. I'm going to see in a moment more. One day he entered the paradise, he was shown the secret of the garden, and he put this book and all he has seen outside the garden. Meaning he took out the book from there. So he took it. So someone can read it. That is the book of Enoch, who brought it from the garden. And it is hidden within or with the companion. The term companion in Aramaic Hebrea means the people who are studying in the time of the Zohar, the book. I mean, the claim made here is actually we have the book of Enoch. We are studying it. Now, meaning 2nd century. The imagine is that we're going to speak later. The book of the Zohar claimed it was written in the 2nd century by a rabbinic figure. And the claim is, it's a claim, an alleged claim for sure, that a book of secrets of Enoch is studied by people mentioned in the book of the Zohar. Afterwards, he put upon himself the light, that light was a garment, in order to show toward on high, so that those who protested in the front of their masters against the creation of the man in the world will be ashamed because of it. Now we have another mythology. Not the mythology of Enoch ascending with God, but the mythology of those guys who protested against the creation of man. Who are those guys? Those guys are the fallen angels. Meaning, Enoch is shown to the fallen angel, which are now here down. How he is perfect, and they are here in darkness, according to first thing. I mean, here we have two myths put together. The mythology of the expulsion of man and the return of Enoch, and the mythology of the fallen angels, which are now shown that a human being can replace them while they are here below. That is a major, how to put it, component of the pseudo-biographical literature. Angels fall because of their lust for women. It's found in the Bible. But what are the names of the angels? And what exactly happens there is not found in the Bible, but is found in pseudo-biographical literature. Now, the Zohar had access to it, and obviously we read it later on reading it, that here we have two myths confronting each other. One, the fall and the return. The other one, what happened to those angels who protested against God? They are here below, what I call the counter mythology. Those angels fell here and cannot return. A mortal who was born as a human can take their place. So here we see a complex mythology which is not found in such a way in the rabbinic literature, but has to do with the presence of a book related to Enoch and of angels who are fallen here, but there is still some form of confrontation between their protest against creating man, which is found in rabbinic literature, in basically rabbinic, but not in the pseudo-biographical literature. But they are shown that you were wrong. You see this person, he is a good guy. God created man with the potential of becoming perfect. And those angels who protested are for sure wrong. Because here they are seeing Enoch replacing them. You see, that's a complex juxtaposition of one myth with another myth. Both of them are important for pseudo-biographical literature. In such a way they are not found before in rabbinic literature. And here they play, in my opinion, an important role. So, line 3 from the fourth from the bottom, because God took him, Enoch, to be in another image, meaning what happened? Enoch was transfigurated from a human into some form of angelic power, take the other image. In this world, he's permanently a youth, meaning he doesn't change. He is becoming actually, as we're going to see in a moment, the ruler of all the worlds. He is the Pancrator, meaning he's ruling now everything. I mean, Unlike the angels who fell, he is now running everything. Even if he did grow now, that's some form of discussion. In the book of Proverbs written, you must educate a young person so that he will remember when he's going to be old how to behave. So here we have interpretations for sure is not correct. When he's going to be old, meaning he will, according to the Zohar, he will remain the same, the young guy. This Metatron, in the moment you see the name, is described as a young, meaning this transfiguration means also some form of immortality. He's not growing old. Because he's found permanently in it, in the image that he received, and turned into a youth. With Enoch, the hidden world is comprised. He is the throne of God, but second line, more important for me, is called Metatron, master over all the supernatural armies. So here we have this mythology taking a mortal into something similar to Jesus Christ, while angels who protested the creation of man are in fact mixed with the humans here below or even lower. So that, you see, that's big mythology, which in my opinion couldn't appear in rabbinic Judaism without knowledge of mythologies found in the pseudepigraphical literature, and that is told without mentioning one word about commandments, Moses, Torah, all this Mosaic literature. This is a complex story, I agree, but if you have a question, ask before I'm going to do something. Yes?
I would like to ask, this is a story about the angels, the fallen angels, being jealous of the man that reached their position. So my question is, if this history is in the Enoch book that we found in the first century.
From?
Is this history of the fallen angels in the first century story? Because it reminds me a lot of the Fallen Paradise by Milton, I think it's in English. Mm-hmm. The story is very similar to me, so I would like to know if it's represented in the first century.
Look, the whole story, I would like not to enter in. The answers are very, very close. There's no doubt that the angelology is found in the caves. Not only the caves, but maybe 200 or 300 years before. For reasons I cannot enter. Thank you so much. Meaning that is an ancient Jewish mythology. That's not an issue that can be doubted, in my opinion, today. 30, 40 years ago, it was, how to put it, the people would say, that's a Christian elaboration on Jewish material. And now, after the publication of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and other, like Slavonic Enoch discovered in Coptic. Today it's not in to say something like that. So, the problem is now not if this literature was transmitted as it is up to the Zohar. There is nothing like faithful transmission. Faithful transmission is, thank you, faithful transmission is, to put it, imagination. There's nothing like faithful transmission. Doesn't matter how someone would like to preserve the material, that's always going to be a change. For sure, those transmitters rabbinized the material. Put a variety of rabbinic elements in order to adopt it. And they was told in a way which is not exactly the pseudepigraphical literature. I mean, I don't come with the claims that there was a transmission which was verbatim, stemming from the caves to the Zohar, despite the fact, there are expressions in the Zohar that I'm going to speak a day after tomorrow, which are verbatim from the caves. That's an issue I should discuss a day after tomorrow. But that's not my claim. I can show examples which are extraordinary examples, which is, how to put it, hard to believe that they exist, but they exist. And we don't know how. But by and large, transmission is transformation. This transformation to rabbinic forms of just influence from outside, which again I cannot enter, Manichaean and a variety of other influences. But the problem is how the Zoharic literature emerged out of pure imagination or by using earlier material and transforming it in accordance to Kabbalah. That is the question. And my answer to it, we should allow transmission of material which covered an area not very well covered by rabbinic literature, which means angelology, which is not coming out of the blue, but as a continuation of earlier traditions. So that is, how to put it, a simple answer to a very complex story. That there were transformations we can see. If you read the Ashkenazi material on the Bible, if you go to Genesis 6, 1 to 4, and to see what the rabbis are saying in Germany about it, no two rabbis who agree to each other. Nevertheless, you can see the influence because there's names of angels. There's no way to explain how those angels emerge while the Bible doesn't mention them. So for sure there are transformations which are going on not only in Jewish culture but also in the book of the Zohar itself. There are a variety of versions dealing with those fallen angels, a very specific term, nevertheless elaborated in a different way by different parts, authors of the Zohar. So we must speak about a term, dynamic pluralism. Means there were many traditions, there was not one tradition, coming from the caves up to the Zohar. There were many. And those traditions are dynamic. And the Zohar is contributing its part in this dynamic by elaborating on the earlier traditions. And then we can see it up to today, which is a topic I cannot enter here. But up to today you can find, in the movies, fallen angels, with whatever form of imagination you can imagine. So Kabbalah has a role in preserving earlier traditions, transforming them, transmitting them to later Jewish culture, but also to Christian culture, Christian Kabbalah, for example, or 19th century, 20th century esotericists like Freemasons. I mean, there's a lot of transmission which is taking place, and we are only at the beginning of those early elements to modern times. And if you're going to look on the internet, fallen angels, you are not being able to see how many books, and stories, pure imagination, are written today. And movies and whatever you can imagine. Means that's not a story which ended with the Zohar. Despite the fact that the Zohar was canonized. But was canonized despite the fact there are various transmissions of this legend in the same book. You cannot bring it. That's why I'm speaking about dynamic pluralism. Not one idea which ran via the centuries. There are many transitions, many what they call great transitions, which is an issue which well we studied. How in Europe there was no Jewish culture. There's no Jewish culture. There didn't exist Jewish culture up to 9th, 10th century. Nothing. And out of the blue, you have an incredible Jewish culture, very rich, in 2 or 3 centuries. What is the source? You believe that those poor Jews were so creative that they created all this material out of the blue? It's quite evident there was something which arrived, a whole string of traditions, which part of them can be documented because of the Gnisa, because of the Qumran and Karaite. There are a lot of testimonies that you can see. Those issues were found in the East. But out of the blue, they are flowering in Europe. So the Book of the Zohar is part of this big transition which created the Jewish culture in Europe in a very short period of time. Meaning, it's hard to understand how some few Jews in Europe could invent all this stuff. That's quite impossible. And even more, why should other Jews accept it? If they are inventions, if that's totally new. Why the Book of the Zohar was accepted? If they're so wild and different, because there was a stratum of culture in which those issues were known in one way or another. So here you have a nice book telling you a story that your grandmother actually told you in a way. She didn't know too much. But Jewish culture was able to receive something like that because it continued with much earlier versions of Jewish culture. So, now that is the story of that. Now, this idea of Enoch ascending more high is from time to time in the Book of the Zohar transformed from Enoch becoming an angel to Enoch becoming a divine figure, which is, how to put it, he was promoted. So, in the Book of the Zohar, he was already promoted. There are parts like this, what I read here. There are other parts in the Zohar that I told you. You can see in a moment, we shall read the text of 2, to see that he became divine. Simply a divine figure. To what extent that is influenced of a Christian vision of Jesus, or a competition to it. That I cannot elaborate here, but to give you an example, in the lower tree certainly there are alien shells, meaning that I shall speak tomorrow more about the shells. As it is planted in the paradise of the Iran pin. The Iran pin is basically one of the lower sphirot, or the configuration of the lower sphirot. I mean, now not an angel, it is much higher. So what happened? Enoch basically entered as Metatron in a paradise which is found within the divine structure. Not an angelic stratum, but something much higher. So there's an example that you can see the same figure is dealt in one passage in such a way, and the second passage in a different way, and then I can bring tens of examples. that shows that the Zoharic literature, and that is true also for Kabbalah, there's nothing like a doctrine. If someone is asking you, what is Metatron in the Zohar? If someone gives one single answer, he's wrong. It depends in what part of the Zohar. So that's a long story in Judaism. But that is also found in Kabbalah. Kabbalah is a very dynamic doctrine, dealing with a dynamic deity, with dynamic person. And also the angels are dynamic, and they ascend and they fall. And there's no reason to assume that there is just one doctrine of angelology. Okay. Now let me show you a combination between the Mosaic Kabbalah and the Enochic Kabbalah. Because the two didn't remain separated. They are coming from separate sources. But the book in the Zohar people didn't care about history. They didn't know that's a different history. So from time to time, they created synthesis. So that's the last text. If you don't have a question, I'm a little bit afraid that you understand too well so difficult issues. No question? Okay. So, another Zoharic text. Happy is the son that has been bound by his father. He linked himself to him in order to do the deeds of the Torah. So you see in a certain moment, Mosaic Kabbalah is actually the deeds are the commandments. And happy is the servant that is bound to his master to perform his will, since he is in the place of the son of the king. Metatron, happy are you and happy are your sons who are linked and bound by phylacteries under the authorities of your master. You see now how Mosaic Metatron became. This angel, which has nothing to do basically with the revelation in the Bible, later on it's more complex. So now he's portrayed basically, which is quite natural, in a rabbinic way. This angel is doing whatever a good Jew is supposed to do, but on high. And this is the reason why, despite that you are the servant of the king, you are higher than all the angels that are appointed over the other nations, meaning Metatron is appointed to the Jews, because this is why he is higher. This is why he's performed the commandment. All the others don't perform the commandment, so they are low. So you see the Mosaic vision of a figure which emerged from another type of Jewish culture and is brought within the Mosaic literature by the book of the Zohar. This is because you are the stool of your master and you serve your master. You are the Shaddai and the Mezuzah put on this. You see, he is actually bringing here several commandments related to Metatron. Why and how is very simple. Metatron in the calculation called Gematria is equal to Shaddai. 340, if you calculate, you see. So someone had an idea, Metatron, you have a divine name. This divine name is equal to your name, and that is part of his divinization. But that is done only in order to allow him to perform all the commandments. So, when the Holy One, blessed be He, descends to rule over the tree of good and evil, the good is Metatron, the evil is Samael. So you can see how also a demonic aspect that I'm going to discuss tomorrow is emerging together with the angelic. I know that Samael is known also among rabbinic Judaism. You don't have to refer to pseudepigraphical literature. But you see that something emerged together, meaning something which was not important for rabbinic Jews. Samael, it's a bad angel, but not very important. And also, Metatron is found in rabbinic literature, but not very important. He's punished there. Here you have this combination, which becomes more and more important. I would liken that some form of, how to put it, preceding what I'm going to say tomorrow. You see that you have a good Metatron, you have a bad Samael. Meaning, Samael, which is the name for Satan, he's not alone. He's not running the world that is done by Metatron. He's in a way some form of brother, which had a function but not terribly important. That I would like to emphasize this issue. There is demonology in rabbinic Judaism, but much less than in pseudepigraphic literature. But this demonology can be characterized as secondary or domesticated. This Samael cannot do you too much. He's around, but he's not a danger. He's a danger for a sinner. Someone who's sinning, he may be attacked by Samael. But as long as you don't sin, there is no chance for Samael or Satan or whatever has a name to attack you. And that is part of the mosaic Judaism. Meaning, as soon as you perform the commandments, you are secure. Satan can make some look at you around, but he doesn't have a chance. That unlike what you have in Christian mysticism, for example, where Satan is terribly important. True? Meaning, to get asceticism in Christianity from the beginning is a struggle with Satan. It's not my invention, there are scholars saying that is Christian asceticism. Continuous struggle with the Satan. We're speaking about ascetic people who are, how to put it, the saints. In Judaism, this Satan is, or Samael, is some form of bureaucratic figure. Time to time he must do something that God doesn't like to do it. But he can do it only to people who are sinners. So here we have something like a domesticated theory, which has much earlier sources, but doesn't have the strength of earlier pseudepigraphical literature or Christianity. To a very great extent, Christianity inherited much more of the pseudepigraphical literature on this topic. And that's also the case of the New Testament. New Testament, the ruler of the world is called how? Satan. He's the ruler of the world. In those texts, Metatron is the ruler of the world. Satan is for sure found somewhere, but he's not dangerous. That is, how to put it, put them, the two together is part of a basic structure in which there is something like commandment which are the antidotes from whatever form of attack. That is, for sure, they told you that the mythology of the rabbis, if you remember my second lecture. That's the mythology of the rabbis. That's the mythology of the Torah. Torah has this power to protect you by performing all the commandments by your limbs. So someone can come but cannot touch you. That's why in the vast Kabbalistic literature, you don't have almost examples of temptation. Meaning, you cannot be tempted because you are so busy to do all the commandments that you are immune of temptation. While in Christian asceticism, people are all the time aware of the Satan, and they must all the time struggle with the danger of being duped by the Satan in the form of an angel, it doesn't matter how. So here, the two issues, Metatron and Samael, are put together. It is part of a much bigger picture, in which for sure there is evil, and tomorrow I shall speak much more. But this evil is subordinated. It cannot work alone. It's to a very great extent asymmetrical. You have here Metatron as if equal to Samael. That is true and not true. There's no symmetry here, because the whole discussion is on Metatron. Samael is mentioned a little bit. That is part which you can say, that's symmetry. There's no symmetry. That is asymmetrical by the place dedicated to the good guy in comparison to Samael. So despite the fact someone may have the idea of symmetry, there's no symmetry. And that we shall discuss tomorrow more on this asymmetrical illusion. So here what I attempted to tell you is that the rabbinic literature was open in a certain moment to receive forms of literature it didn't like. It didn't happen in the East. It happened in Europe. Why it happened in Europe is again a long story that must be investigated. But the simple answer is, in the East, meaning Babylonia, land of Israel, Northern Africa, rabbinic literature developed in certain groups, in certain institutions. And those institutions resisted the invasion of angelology and demonology. What happened with this literature when it arrived in Europe? It arrived without the institutions. It was with ideas. You didn't know from where it came. You were not actually in Europe. You consumed everything as if everything is Jewish. So there was an openness, which was not a matter of principle. It was a matter of, how to put it, historical circumstances, in which a lot of material, which came from separate sources, arrived to a certain place together, and people couldn't distinguish. And they had no reason to distinguish. That is coming from a sect, that is coming from a great rabbi, that's coming from Palestine, that's coming from Babylonia. All this stuff, to a certain extent, was attenuated in Europe. So the Jewish culture in Europe could develop in a much greater freedom, because of ignorance, for sure, that we are dealing with a variety of traditions. And then you could adopt X and Y and Z, which are coming from different sources, and they only interact in the East, because in the East the institutions were different. In Europe there was nothing. Don't look to what we know today, what happened in Europe. In Europe was a revolution, the institution emerged later. But earlier there was no institution. There was a lot of books, traditions coming, and influx, in fact. took some time to make order. The most important figure here is, if you heard the name, Rashi, Rabbi Yitzchaki, meaning someone had to explain to European Jews what's written in the Bible. People couldn't understand the Bible. So a huge commentary on the Bible emerged. Talmud, people couldn't understand the Talmud. He wrote a whole interpretation of the Talmud. Why? Because it's written on another continent, by other people, in another language. So we have a moment of reorganization, but a lot of material emerged. And with the time, in 1 or 2 centuries, European Jewry became stabilized. The Sephardi culture, the Ashkenazi culture, even the French culture, Italian culture, Byzantine culture. So slowly we can speak about a reorganization. But there was a moment of fluidity in which those different traditions didn't coexist. They all just arrived to a certain place and people made choices. And slowly the choices became institutions. So that is, Kabbalah is part of this reorganization of knowledge. A variety of traditions were put together, reinterpreted all the time, as happened with this myth, but also with any other topic you can imagine. And slowly it was canonized. And then we have a canon. And it's more difficult to create later on in a fresh way, but there was a period of some form of confusion, freedom, however you like to call it, in which people could create more and more rapidly. Slowly, after the 13th century, you can see Jewish creativity in Europe is declining. Institutions become more powerful. So, you have 5 minutes. Questions?
More than a question, maybe a reflection.
Excuse me?
More than a question, what I have is a reflection about something you spoke earlier. Considering that for some rabbinic sages, considering that the rabbinic sages in the Talmud, they criticize Metatron, and he's shown as the theory of the 2 divine figures in heaven. We could say that Kabbalists rejected the rabbinic point of view of Metatron, and they retake the pseudepigrapha point of view the ancient authors had.
Look, Metatron is such a difficult figure, and there are so many discussions about him, even in the Talmud, but also in magical literature, in Echalot literature. Each have another Metatron, which shows that before there were other traditions. There were other traditions, in my opinion, without the name Metatron, the pseudepigraphic literature, even in Hellenistic culture, which vice god Moses sitting on the throne, and Jesus. So Metatron emerges out of different traditions. The rabbis didn't like it. They wanted this direct contact between the person performing the commandments and God, without mediation. So Metatron couldn't play an important role, because they had another type of contact with the divinity. What I told you, that the Mosaic Judaism. They didn't need Metatron. So what is doing Metatron in the rabbinic literature? He's doing one thing. He's writing down the merits of the Jews. Okay, so that's a very tamed Metatron. He's a scribe, writing down there only the good things basically. What happened later, and that's your question. Other sources dealing with Metatron like magical sources. So we have a huge magical Jewish literature. We still don't know how much it is. Still, that's only the beginning of scholarship. There are thousands of magical material found in Iraq in 91, 92, also before, but out of the blue, there's an influx, which are not published. Not to speak about the Gniza, where magic is very important, and also Ashkenazi literature with magic. Metatron is found there. He's an important angel there, more important than the rabbis. But in the Zoharic literature, they had access to a part of it. And they didn't see a problem not to combine the rabbinic vision of Metatron as a much more modest guy with the powerful Metatron in magical literature or in the Echalot literature. So that's part of what I call the mixture that emerged in a certain place. Maybe a rabbi writing the Talmud wouldn't like to speak about the magical aspects of Metatron, because he is coming from another tradition. In Europe, people didn't know from where it's coming. Everything was there on the table. You can create your puzzle in one way or another. That's why we have the emergence of such a big literature and variegated literature. That's why in the title of my lectures I put variety. Because there was a variety before, and this variety was increased by different new combinations. And that you can find in the book of the Zohar, you can find in Castile Kabbalah, which you're going to speak tomorrow. This variety created the condition for creativity. Because when you have one single tradition, you cannot create, you are inhibited. You can repeat, you can interpret, but you cannot go beyond what you know from one tradition. When you see the spectrum, you have at least the possibility to create. Now, who created more or less, that's another story. You know, the Ashkenazi Jewry didn't create too much. They were much more transmitters, faithful transmitters, maybe. They actually documented. And that's important because you can see the variety there, but you don't see the creativity there. One thing they arrived to Spain, they like not to enter now on apotheosis of Spain. But what happened here is indeed different. That the book of the Zohar became a classic, became a quite influential book. That's not something that I can exaggerate. So when it was here, you remember the first lecture, that there was a meeting point of people coming from Ashkenaz, Castile, from Ashkenaz, from Castile, from the land of Israel, from Northern Africa. You remember? That created the possibility that Jews here will create more in a new form rather than earlier. I mean, there's nothing mystical in my explanation. My explanation is very down to earth. I would like not to enter now a comparison to Alfonso Sabio, who was very important in creating the space for the meeting, but not so much the content of the meeting, which is, again, if you don't have questions, I see that you understand. But what happened, if you look to the Renaissance of Alfonso Sabio, you have a little bit magic that was found earlier. So you have elements which are new here. But that's not extraordinarily creative. remained, culturally speaking, from his Renaissance. Can tell me? Maybe I don't know. So, what happened? He created the condition for a meeting which took place and can be documented by names, by books that arrived to Castile, by books that were written in Castile. While in the case of Alfonso Sabio, you know the books that were translated. You know what he wrote. You know his good intentions. But what happened culturally later? Maybe you know. I don't know. But what happened in Catalonia, it's another story, which is not our topic, but had a much bigger influence. Ramon Llull had an influence incredibly greater than Alfonso. True? Or I exaggerate? So that's a story which I cannot enter here, a comparison. Because what happened among the Jews in Catalonia was less creative. But what happened to Ramon Llull and Arnaldo Villanova was much more creative. And that's inverse than what happened in Castile. So I believe that, if you understand all these issues, that you must be very advanced. So no question. Wow. I spoke about so many difficult issues that, hard to believe that you understand that.
I have one question, but maybe it's more important. But you have mentioned the non-importance of Satan,
Yes.
right? But there is some relationship between this figure
Yes.
and his function of persecuting attorney
What?
of Satan,
Yes.
is persecuting attorney,
Yes.
and what can you
Look,
tell about this function?
you know a book in Judaism dealing with Satan? You know a chapter in a book, a chapter dealing with Satan? You know stories about Satan tempting the rabbis? So that's for me how to put the symptoms of the importance. If you don't have, in Christian literature, it started from the 2nd, 3rd century with the fathers of the desert, where they are fighting the Satan all the time. Up to 16th, 17th, 18th century Europe, with the Sabbath of witches going to the Satan, through. And how many people were killed because of it? 40, 50,000 women and men were killed because they believe in the Satan. It's true, or is it an exaggeration? So, show me one example of someone in Judaism killed because they had a relation with Satan. One. That's not enough. We're speaking about tens of thousands of people who were killed only because other people believe that they had a relation with Satan. I exaggerate? You like other criteria? Show me a picture of the Satan in Judaism. How many pictures do you have in Christian literature?
I have one description where we found Satan
Yeah.
as a persecuting attorney,
Okay, so maybe you have.
appointing this guy who is murdered.
Look,
In,
I cannot deny any document you're going to show me. But I would like to see the big picture, and not to show you, here, you see that Satan is here. Okay. So in any case, I don't believe he was there. But okay. But I have to think about what? The Inquisition having trials for tens of thousands of people who are executed because of it. You can compare this mentioning of Satan. I don't say the Jews didn't believe there is Satan. They believed, but they believed they are immune. With the exception of those Jews, they were sinners, for sure. Okay, so thank you very much.